Our next speaker, Christian Frigerio, studies philosophical sciences at the State University of Milan, where he got his degree with a dissertation on the debate over internal and external relations. His research focuses on contemporary speculative philosophies, especially those of Whitehead and Deleuze, and on American pragmatism. And his talk is entitled Tackling the Concrete, Whitehead's Organic Empiricism and the Role of Practice.
Thank you, Professor Petek. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's see if I can manage this. Okay, do you see it? Do you see it?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So in this exposition, I will use some passages from Whitehead's Harvard lectures to defend the idea that his organic empiricism, as he calls it in these same lectures, can be understood as an attempt at overcoming what I will refer to as two dogmas of classical, that is, human empiricism. The first is the idea that relations as such are never given in a direct experience, but are superadded to a mass of loose non-relational sense impressions by some superior faculty. This I will call the blindness thesis, using Kant's famous dictum that intuitions without concepts are blind. Kant, I think, does share this thesis limitedly to sensitivity. The second is instead the thesis I will call the armchair thesis, consisting in the idea that the practice must always remain alien to philosophical speculation. For Hume, indeed, we may be satisfied of assuming causation and constant conjunction as practical agents, but philosophy is a completely different thing. Both these dogmas were famously challenged by William James, the first through his radical empiricism, the second through his pragmatism. I will argue, however, that Whitehead's organic empiricism can be meant as a still further step, which combines a form of radical empiricism with a form of pragmatism, framing both within an accomplished metaphysical scheme. In particular, I will use two crucial passages from the Harvard lectures that should shed light on some themes that Whitehead treats in symbolism and process and reality, for which, as we know, the lectures were a sort of laboratory, but that Whitehead in those books does not treat, I think, with that much clarity. So let us start from the second dogma, from the armchair thesis. Clearly, the idea that practice must always remain alien to philosophy is not a sole right of empiricism. In fact, it was shared by probably the most of Western philosophers. In The Quest for Certainty, Dewey has shown how the main feature of practical activity is precisely uncertainty, and this is why many thinkers have, in a way, tried to exorcise it. Hume's endorsement of his thesis, however, is peculiar because first, Hume had shown to which extent theoretical knowledge is itself uncertain. And second, because Hume denies a role to practice not because of its characteristic uncertainty, but on the contrary, because if he had admitted it, he could have come on certain matters to a higher degree of certainty than he ever hoped to. Here are two of the passages in which Hume elaborates extensively on this dualism of approaches between practice and philosophy, coming to define the first as a degeneration from the second. As I said, it was William James who took the step. Very roughly, pragmatism, Jamesian pragmatism at least, can be understood as the idea that an idea, sorry for the repetition, can be taken as true if it can serve as an effective guide for our worldly practice. Thus, James' contribution was, in Charlene Siegfried's words, to expand the province of rationality, thus admitting practice into philosophical inquiry. I think that Whitehead came on his own to this same conclusion, but in the Harvard lectures, he can't help crediting James with it. Here, Whitehead is arguing against Hume and Bertrand Russell, but I will leave Russell aside for the moment. Whitehead says that if you appeal to practice, you must bring practice into fundamental meaning of truth itself. We see that for Whitehead, commitment is always engagement. It can never be a merely hypothetical or fictional. And the doubt can never be a mere paper doubt, to use a term by Peirce, but it must always express genuine perplexity regarding every aspect of our knowledge, thus included practical knowledge. Said otherwise, if we need to postulate something in order to account for the possibility of our practice or for the success of our practical strategies, then that something must have some effective rooting in reality, some effective grasp on the world. I will call this thesis, it is a little verbose, but please turn a blind eye, the solidarity of practice and speculation thesis. This is, after all, inherent in Whitehead's definition of speculative philosophy. Applicability and adequacy, which define the empirical side of the speculative scheme, could also be read as a reliability, meaning that the speculative scheme that we build must also serve as an effective guide for our conduct. Also, as you know, Whitehead compares speculation to the flight of an airplane, and we may say that practice is precisely where this airplane finally lands to test the results of our inquiry. In the last passage I've quoted in this slide, Whitehead reproaches Hume because he violated common sense. The problem is not really common sense, as you know. Whitehead was quite a revisionist on this, but it consists in the fact that Hume's aeroplane, let's say, cannot land in this field of practice. Now, in symbolism, this discovery is credited not to James, but to Santayana, who in Skepticism and Animal Faith had shown how, sticking to Hume's principles, we can only be led in a solipsism of the present moment, which would make any form of life impossible. Now, Santayana was a sort of skeptic himself, so I think that the reference to James in the lectures is much more on point. I mean, guess that James's name was finally removed because of Whitehead's let's say, Whitehead's wish to keep himself out from the controversies around the pragmatism. But Whitehead's frequent opposition between his rationalism and James and Dewey's pragmatism notwithstanding, this is probably where it comes nearest to a form of pragmatism. Maria Regina Brioschi, after me, will tell us a lot more about these pragmatist aspects in Whitehead. Still, symbolism betrays here and there some traces of his initial pragmatist inspiration. For instance, when Whitehead seems unable to account for the symbolic integration of presentational immediacy and causal efficacy, and thus is brought to an appeal to the pragmatic aspect of our practice to the future. So let us pass to the second dogma, the blindness thesis. As I said, this was challenged by William James with his radical empiricism. The basic idea is that, contrary to Hume, relations are in fact given in experience, and these are not only disjunctive relations as in Hume, but also conjunctive relations which account for the continuities that you experience. Whitehead follows James this far, but I think he takes a step further. This is the second crucial passage from the Harvard lectures. Whitehead says that humankind's appeal to practice is an appeal to unanalyzed internal relations. Sticking to my verbosity, I will call this the need for internal relations in practice thesis. So what does this appeal to internal relations mean? I think we can summarize this in 3 points. First, internal relations are relevant for the identity of their terms, meaning that when relations change, the nature themselves of the terms are changed. Therefore, second, relations are not arbitrary because they are in a measure grounded in the terms themselves. And therefore, third, things held by internal relations tend to form some kind of structure or of a more or less integrated whole. The best summary of these 3 points in Whitehead's philosophy is probably the principle of relativity, according to which actual entities involve each other by reason of their prehensions of each other. But I think that tomorrow Alessia Giacone will tell us something more about internal relations and also the principle of solidarity. Still, we must remember that Whitehead is not a radical internalist, meaning that obviously he is not a radical monist. In fact, he appeals to internal relations, which are yet in a sense external relations, meaning that we must always seek for a delicate balancing between monistic and pluralistic aspects. When it comes to empiricism, however, Hume's position can be understood as the first real forerunner of the thesis of the exteriority of relations, with his depiction of the world of experience as a mass of loose atomic independent non-relational sense impressions or particulars. And this is why Whitehead focuses on the opposite side of the spectrum, which is that of internal relations. Also, historically speaking, the true champion of external relations was Bertrand Russell, and this explains the reference to his name in the first passage I have quoted. So the question is, why, according to Whitehead, does practice entail internal relations? I think we may list 4 reasons for this, which are actually, I think, only variants over a single feature of reality, which we may define as Whitehead's view of our being in the world. The first is causal efficacy. Hume's problems with causation arose from his view of causation as an extrinsic relation between 2 completely distinct events. On the contrary, for Whitehead, as you know, causation issues from the pressure that antecedent occasions exercise upon us. And this gives a much more integrated, that is, relational view of what causation is, and a view of causation which is also bodily felt, thus evaluating the role of body and proprioception in the frame of empiricism. Here I have quoted also Mumford and Anjum, which are 2 analytic philosophers who see their enterprise as a prosecution as a continuation of Whitehead's own, and that reproach Hume precisely because he did not leave any room for proprioception, thus falling, the skeptical problems of which we know very well. The second fact is what I call modal constraint. As I said, internal relations are non-contingent relations because they are in a measure grounded in the natures of their terms. This means that, contrary to Hume, a form of at least a soft necessity is already given in experience. Jonathan Schaffer writes in a similar context that a disconnected pluralistic heap should be amenable to free recombination. Failure of free recombination is thus the modal signature of an interconnected monistic cosmos. As I said, Whitehead does not go this far, but it does hold that the fact that we cannot rearrange the world and our experience of it at pleasure is an index of the fact that the world is held by internal relations. Also, in the lectures, he says that sense data are relational, meaning internally relational, in the sense that they impose their modes of presentation, thus strongly limiting our arbitrium when it comes to the way the world presents itself to us. Third is conformation to the world, which is necessary if our practice is to be effective, precisely because we cannot rearrange the world at pleasure. Whitehead writes in Symbolism that the bonds of causal efficacy arise from without us. They disclose the character of the world from which we issue, an inescapable condition around which we shape ourselves. Also, always in Symbolism, this character of the world, that when he refers to the need to conform to the past, Whitehead calls also the stubborn character of the world, is referred to the pragmatic aspect. He writes, the obviousness of the pragmatic aspect is simply the obviousness of the perception of the fact of conformation, thus highlighting once again which relevance can have practice when we admit it into the field of our inquiry. Finally, we have causal partners. If we had to give a Whiteheadian account of agency, we should probably use the concept of a power that, as Dibes and Basile, among others, have shown, Whitehead draws from Locke. But power is always double. It is an active power to produce effects, but also a passive power to receive them. which is why powers ontology are typically relational ontology. And this is also why Hume dismissed the powers together with any other form of intrinsic connections. So I think that the best summary of these four aspects can be found in what Whitehead once said to his colleague Hawking, that the real is being tackled at rugby. Here Whitehead was using the real in an almost psychoanalytic sense as that which issues from without us, that which is other than us, but that, at least in the long run, obliges us to take it into account. This happens because we are not alone in the world, and the world has a structure of its own that we do not build, but we found as already given, and that is held by internal relations, thus obliging us to take it into account if our practice wants to be effective. So I see that I still have time. Yeah, I'm a fan of the story. Maybe you won't understand why I put it here, but let's try. I think we may list a fifth reason why practice entails internal relations. This is the fact that if we consider an intelligent sense of practice, then we must rely for our habits of conduct on regularities which we find in the world. Hume was well aware that this was impossible by sticking to his principles. And this is why subsequent empiricism introduced the principle of uniformity, according to which what happens under some circumstances will happen again under the same conditions when similar circumstances recur. John Stuart Mill himself, it is to Mill that we owe the first true formulation of this principle, was aware that this principle is obtained through induction, which is the same operation that the principle of uniformity is called to ground. And this is why Whitehead, because of his vicious circularity, that Whitehead classifies appeals to the principles of uniformity with appeals to magic and miracles. Whitehead, however, does hold that we must have some, that the regularities on which we base our conduct must have some effective rooting in reality. This is possible, but only...
2.5 minutes.
Okay, thanks. This is possible, but only if we give up Humean preconditions altogether. Whitehead says in the lectures that each sense datum being held to its neighbors by internal relations carries a beyondness, meaning that because of the internality of relations, each sense datum carries information regarding its neighbors, which carry information regarding their neighbors, and so on, so that virtually each element of our experience carries a sort of blueprint regarding virtually the whole of the cosmos. Always in the lectures, Whitehead says that metaphysics concerns internal relations, meaning that it concerns the possibility of generalization. And precisely the fact that internal relations are given in experience strongly blurs the boundary between a particular experience and the generalizations that we draw from it. Each sense data already contains the germ of the generalizations that we subsequently draw from it. So this is very conjectural, but as you all know, according to Hume, belief in causality arose because of the repeated experience of constant conjunctions. Now, it is curious that for Whitehead, causation, which is the thing to be explained, memory, which is the medium for explanation, and the repetition, which is the what makes the belief in causation possible, are the same thing. Memory is identical to causation, to causal efficacy, as he explains throughout the lectures, and they are precisely identical with repetition. They consist in the repetition of antecedent entities in subsequent ones. If we stick to these terms, we may say that in a very concrete sense, actual entities are beliefs, because Whitehead's account of the coming into being of actual entities is precisely the same as Hume's account of the formation of beliefs. In a sense, actual entities are embodied beliefs, and this is why they come to be with already a presentiment of the generalities amid which they are born. So this is yeah.
Just about at time. Yep.
Okay, this was only to show that the same goes for laws of nature. And just to conclude, I think that organic empiricism is a perfect definition for Whitehead's empiricism, precisely because, as I already stressed, sense data are held by internal relations, meaning that they are organically related, and second, because experience is organically grounded, meaning that we must always take practice and bodily practice into account. And this is just to cause some flame as a possible matrix of discussion. I'm not arguing that organic empiricism is in any way better than James's radical empiricism, but I think they do have some different features which could make organic empiricism more apt for some philosophical temperaments. Thank you.
Wonderful. Grazie. So continuing on our Italian morning, afternoon here. Thank you so much, Professor Frigerio, for that wonderful talk. I see we have got a stack already, and I'm going to head right to it. If you want to take your presentation down, we'll turn first to Ronnie, please.
Hello, Christian. Thanks for your talk. I really enjoyed it, and I really think it's important that you show how practice entails internal relations. Now, the reasons you give, the four major reasons you give, actually all relate to the past. It's, let's say, the pressure of the past, confirmation to the past, and things like that. But in HL2, Whitehead gives some really practical things about the future. So maybe you could tell us a bit about that as well. Because, you know, practice is like a calendar for next year, practice is a railway table. That's practice too, but that does not really involve causality, but it's more about the future. And that's an aspect maybe you can also talk about.
Yeah, thank you for this question. In the last scheme I showed, there is I put indeed an opposition between the fact that, as you know, for James, ideas are future-oriented, and this is because of practice indeed. While for Whitehead, ideas are still justified by their origins. This is a link with, I think, with classical empiricism, to which Whitehead gives also a metaphysical and not exclusively a psychological grounding. Still, as you said in the lectures, there are some important remarks regarding, let's say, the fact that the future-oriented nature of a practice must always be taken into account when you try to build our speculative scheme. Especially, I think that it is the aspect of the need to rely on some actual regularities, which underlies the need to take always the future into consideration. But surely the fact that for Whitehead there is always, let's say, conformation is always to the past, basically, because contemporary occasions are held by external relations. In fact, he says very explicitly, sorry, that the disjointness of contemporary occasions is the ground for the elbow room within the universe. Still, we must always there is always the need to conform to what comes to us from our past. So there is this very strict interplay between the dimension of present and of future, with which underlie the externalist aspects of, that is, the pluralistic aspects of Whitehead's philosophy, whereas the past, which is what I think Whitehead focuses on when he talks about practice, gives us a more interconnected view of the cosmos, because indeed we share the same past. I don't know if that is enough for.
Yes, yes, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else like to jump in? Yes, George. Oops. George, did I lose you?
There we go. There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you, Christian. That was a wonderful presentation. And I initially withdrew my question because Ronnie had raised it about the nature of the future in these internal relations. But one of your slides did say, while Whitehead believed in internal relations, he was not a strong or a radical internal relatedness. Clearly, Russell, in his view, was an external related, total denier, as Hume, in the case of causality, denying causality, was in effect denying any internal relatedness. So who did you have? Who's the elephant in the room against whom everyone's arguing here, in your impression? And what is the nature of Whitehead's synthesis or resolution of the contest between that unnamed elephant, who is a total internal relatedness, and Russell and others who deny it?
Well, if you talk about Russell, the elephant is probably Leibniz. The debate between internal and external relations was born from Russell's book on Leibniz. Instead, if you're talking about his implicit target, that would be probably Bradley or Anglo-Saxon idealism more broadly understood. When it comes to Whitehead, I think that he's always, in a way, thinking about Leibniz when he talks about relations. He's very explicit, for instance, in Science and the Modern World, that he's using the concept of his concept of the actual entities modeled on Leibniz's concept of the monad. Obviously, only he's dissolving this concept into the space-time, and this means both that actual entities are more, let's say, separated in the sense that they do not reflect the whole world with the same precision as what Leibniz monads, but they are also more interconnected because, as you know, Leibniz monads had no windows. Instead, apprehension is precisely what Leibniz called a window. It is an external relation in the sense that it is a relation which cannot be merely reduced to its terms. Relations, according to Whitehead, have an irreducible reality, and this is why I think his proposal is much more sophisticated than Russell, which is a mere affirmation of very irreducibility, but also throughout negation of their capacity to affect their terms.
It seems to leave a problem in that, well, if Whitehead's response, and I think it's right to say it's even more Bradley than Leibniz that's bothering him here, because Bradley has set the stage for this notion that with all things internally related, there is no possibility of distinction. And that's really what logical atomism is opposed to. But how do you solve that problem? It's like the many and the one, and continuity and change, and all these other tensions that Whitehead is wrestling with. It's not enough to say Bradley's wrong, or on the other hand, that clearly Russell's wrong. The world is not merely a heap of shot that could be rearranged in any way possible. There are limitations, modal limitations, as Schaeffer said, on what can be done with that heap, a pluralistic heap. And how do they come about? Well, Whitehead's doctrine of asymmetrical internal relatedness meant that the past was externally related to the present, but the present was internally related to the past. But then we're back to Ronnie Desmond's question. How are we supposed to understand the future? Internal, external? Internal.
No, you're perfectly right. For instance, Hartshorne has particularly insisted on the asymmetric nature of relations from a Whiteheadian point of view. I think that we may say that according to Whitehead, the future does not exist in a real sense, in the same sense as the present or the past. I think that when it comes to practice, we may say that since the future will be all or will have been present and then past, there is an aspect of interiority to it as there is for the present. For instance, contemporary occasions have no direct relations, but they are nonetheless mediated, related indirectly by the fact that they share the same past. But that this is a difficult.
Yeah, it is. No, this is good. I'm sorry to jump in and stop this great exchange. Thank you so much, Christian. Let's give him another hand virtually, everyone, for another excellent talk. Thank you very much for that.